Good evening. My name is Juno Ivers. I am the co-treasurer of Seattle Council PTSA, and I am excited to bring for our legislative advocacy group our guest advocates, Director Liza Rankin, Natalya Yudovsky from Washington State PTA, and also Danica Noble from Washington State PTA. And our email said that we had 90 days until legislative session, but in actuality, we have 60 days. So I'd like to thank Director Rankin for reminding me that today. And if you have any moments that you want to share, I think we're going to start with Director Rankin. And you have some pictures and slides.
So thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you Seattle Council for inviting me to come and talk about legislative advocacy. So yes, I serve on the Seattle School Board. I'm halfway through a second term, and I've been our board's legislative liaison for a few years, which means that I represent our board when WSDA, which is the Washington State School Director Association, similar to how, there are individual PTAs, and then there's Seattle Council, and then there's Washington State PTA, and you all may set legislative priorities at each level. All the school boards in the state are members of WSDA, which is basically like the umbrella for the all statewide school board directors. We adopt a legislative platform every year also, and every board can send one voting delegate. So I, as our legislative liaison, am our voting delegate. And then also, especially during legislative session, I'm sort of the point of contact for making sure that everybody's aligned and on the same page, and that we're all, if different board directors are talking to legislators or doing various things, that it all comes through the same point of contact, which is me, and also a couple of staff members. So I wanted to start, and I should say, if there's any point where someone has a question, or I'm going too fast or repeating myself, whatever, feel free to do a hand raise or pop something in the chat. I'm not great at managing that, but June is. And so if something comes up, June can interrupt me. And I have a very informal presentation, so don't feel bad about asking me to stop. What I wanted to start with was, we were talking about our local public schools, and we're talking about Seattle public schools. Why does it matter what's happening at the state level? And so I wanted to start with an infographic that I made that just sort of is it is an overview of what the different roles are for the entities sorry, there's a cat visiting us, that define public education in Washington state. The federal government is responsible for national standards and civil rights. So at the federal level, federal government passes education-related laws, establishes standards, prohibits discrimination. Again, this was pre this year, and provides federal aid via title funds, nutrition programs, and special education. So when people are talking about returning education to the states are already where the bulk of, here we go, perfect. The states are already where the bulk of the conversation and direction definition of public schools are. So as you can see at the top there, federal law establishes the standards and protects civil rights, has protected civil rights, and basically says, states, you're all responsible for providing education to the children that live in your state. So at the state level, the states create statutes and rules, educational standards and graduation requirements, funding formulas and allocations, teacher qualifications, and authorize local districts to implement the state's program. So the state legislature is the most powerful, I guess, body that determines what public education looks like in school districts, including Seattle Public Schools. So it's the legislature, the legislative body of the state, that defines how funding is going to go, how much funding there is per student, and what the requirements are at the state level. And there's a lot of things in common across states, but there are also a lot of things that are wildly different, especially when it comes to funding. And so all of those things that are in state statute, the state being the legislative body, one of those requirements and different things that the state does is authorize local districts like Seattle Public Schools and empowers local districts to elect a governing board to represent those residing within the boundaries of the school district. So that in our case would be the Seattle Public Schools and our board. So we're not a legislative body like city council is or the state legislature where they are creating the statutes and requirements. Our job is policy, and the policy needs to reflect what's already in state law. Locally, we can go above and beyond those things if there are additional things that we want to have happen in Seattle or in other districts. But for the most part, the bulk of any school district's policy manual is going to be a reflection of what's required in state law in a way that directs the superintendent to do the things in state law. Everybody with me so far? So part of the state's authorization is you can elect and you need to elect a local governing body that represents your district's community that is not authorized to make up whatever you want, but to enforce state laws and to provide the local voice for priorities. And that really matters in blue, red, any parts of the country. It really matters that the position of a school board director and school board is nonpartisan, because what we are responsible for approving and enforcing is what's in our state laws. So there's some different boards across the state of Washington right now that are bringing, not very many, but, bringing forward resolutions saying, we shouldn't have to allow children to go by any gender other than the one they were born with. And my response to that is, if you feel that way, you feel that way, but state law says you do have to honor a child's identity and you do have to allow a child access to education and anything connected to education in alignment with their gender identity. That's just one example. So we represent the local community, but that doesn't supersede what's required by law. We can't say, well, our local community, like during the pandemic, our local community doesn't want to wear masks. Well, state law right now, it's a directive from the state and we're part of the state's education program. So you have to, if you want to have kids back in person, that's part of what the state is requiring right now. So those are, somewhat more extreme examples, but it's important to understand that the board does not make its own legislation for what school districts do and don't do. We are authorized by the state and we receive funding from the state to provide education in accordance with the law. The school board then has policy, and then the school board is also authorized and directed by state law to hire a superintendent who reports to the board that is responsible for carrying out and administering all these policies and procedures. So state law defines, here's the money you get, here's what you have, here's what public education is, what you have to provide. And the board says, okay, and then we approve policies that are aligned with that. And then we hire a superintendent to say, superintendent, we're specifically going to supervise and manage you as our one employee, and we're going to charge you with running the district. So then what you experience down at the school level is the result of the result of how the superintendent and staff implement the policies of the state in alignment with direction from the school board. And so there are some things that by school and by community, by classroom even, are going to be different depending on the community that's there. But there are going to be some things that are the same and consistent across, or should be the same and consistent across all schools in terms of resources, educational standards, what kind of access children have to education. So that's kind of the the big bucket. There's all kinds of other organizations that also have input with the state as to like what the legal requirements are. So graduation requirements, different labor considerations, a lot of different organizations like the State Board of Education and all kinds of things contribute to what ends up in state law. So it's not, these bodies don't operate alone, but these are sort of the biggest buckets: state, school board, superintendent, school. So why advocacy, why the state legislature and legislative session really matters is because that's where Washington state defines what public education looks like and is. And so that gets into a lot about funding and a lot about legal requirements. So the funding is either comes from the state or is directed by the state. We have state basic educational funding, that's a state formula. And then the state allows school districts, in our state, allows school districts to also run, they're supposed to be supplemental enrichment levies, but because we're underfunded, they end up covering a lot of basic education costs. But that's limited to property tax. So unlike a city council that could say, we want to raise money for this thing and we want to do it with an excise tax on this asset, or we want to do it by adding something to the sales tax or the soda tax. Like city legislative bodies have a lot more flexibility and options for where they can seek funding than school districts do. School districts can only seek additional funding from taxpayers through a property tax levy as authorized by the state. And so, and there's a cap to that as well. The state doesn't say, yeah, raise whatever money you want, do whatever you want. In our state, they say you can raise a little bit more money, but only up to this level. And there's a whole conversation to be had there about McCleary, which could take us, 4 hours, which I won't go into. But so basically, the state legislature really, really matters because they determine what we need to teach and what money we have to do it. And so it's important to advocate to the legislature as they make decisions about state laws, as people experiencing this, as people in the classroom, and as taxpayers, and as representatives of the community. What's important and why, and how do we work together to do better for all kids? So the next, June, if you have it, there's I think did I send you? I'm so sorry.
Just time checking at 6:51, but
Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, the state's paramount duty is education. That's something that's unique to our Constitution. And so you could take that to mean, doesn't matter how much money the state has, doesn't matter where it comes from. In our Constitution, it says you will fund education and fund it first. That would be great. That doesn't really work that way. And especially this upcoming session with the state facing its own structural deficit where they've passed a budget for themselves that they now do not have enough revenue to cover. There's going to be people trying to figure out ways to balance. We're trying to reckon with a deficit, so is the state. And so how much money really matters, and us as districts being able to say, here's why we need more money per student matters, but where the money comes from also really matters. And in our state, part of the challenge with raising enough funds is we have a deeply regressive tax structure. And not only is it regressive, it's inadequate. So most states have a couple of different ways that funds are raised at the state level. Income tax, sales tax, and property tax are the three big buckets. And various states have various ways of raising revenue, generating revenue to pay for any state program, including education. those kind of, like any kind of portfolio that you want to be diverse, you don't want all of your money to come from one place. You want to spread it out. We only have two of those big buckets because we don't have an income tax. So sales tax is very, very regressive. It hits lower income folks harder than it hits higher income folks. And then same with property tax. And those are also can be volatile sources. So income tax is a pretty stable and consistent source of revenue because high incomes tend to stay high and tend to be consistent year over year. So if you're taxing those incomes, it's pretty reliable. Property taxes wildly fluctuate. So you may have, a tax rate that you think is going to generate good income. And then the stock or the housing market, the bottoms out. Properties are not as high value as they were, so they're not going to generate tax income. So property tax and sales tax are both inequitable and inadequate, and they're not as reliable a consistent source of revenue. So when we talk about school funding, it's important for us to talk about what we need for students, but it also does really matter where the funding comes from. And before I get too into the weeds, I could probably stop there and see what other folks have, but that's just, I could go into greater detail if people are interested. The one other thing that's so valuable about having all of us advocating in different ways is we will all have our legislative platforms for our various organizations that will have some overlaps, and we'll have some things that are different because at the district level, for example, I'll be bringing our legislative priorities for 2026 to the board next week, I think. Yeah, next week. And it will focus on funding and focus on serving students, but it will focus specifically on a couple of technical things that we believe there's leverage and the ability to accomplish this session. So it's not a budget session. There's not new revenue being new budgeting happening. We're going to be asking to not penalize districts for enrollment decline. So we're going to be saying, we know you're not going to redo the whole funding formula between now and April. We do know that you've budgeted a certain amount of money. And even if there are fewer students across the state, we want you to still give that money to K-12 education. There's also a budget proviso that we'll be asking where there was a new sales tax implemented after last session that they promised wasn't going to impact public schools, even though we said, we're pretty sure this is going to impact public schools. And they said, no, it's not going to. Don't worry about it. Oh, it is. It is impacting public schools. It could cost SPS somewhere in the ballpark of $2 million, which, compared to 1.6 billion is not huge, but $2 million, that's a few counselors, that's not nothing. And we're already trying to make up a deficit. So for them to have added that in, so that's something that we're going to be focused on. And we're going to continue to talk about the broader issues of the prototypical funding formula is insufficient, doesn't meet the needs of students. But we're going to focus on what can we ask legislators to accomplish in 3 months at the beginning of 2026 for our platform. And so that short-term, long-term is something that's really good to think about. The Washington State School Director Association also has a legislative platform where we've kind of honed in on some similar themes. So we will be advocating for that as school boards and school districts. And you all as PTA will have, again, some similar focus and some additional things I'm sure that you'll be asking for. And so the more we can be in coalition with each other and talk about different bills that are meeting all of our needs, the more powerful we can be and align our asks and move mountains, quite honestly, as we have in the last couple sessions. So I'm happy to, invite me to come to your PTA. If you have more questions, like specifically about any of these areas, because those are some kind of big buckets that I just hit, I'm happy to be a resource. But for now, I'll pass it off to Natalya. Unless anyone has any questions right now, burning questions.
There was a question about whether those 3 points you're focusing on can be written out.
Oh, for the SPS legislative
Yeah.
platform, you mean? Yeah, I'll be bringing that in written form to the board. We're still finalizing the draft. So that will come in written form to the board next week. And I think I'm going to ask them I think that we're asking the board to adopt it, and then SPS can start putting resources towards communicating out about it, and it'll be on the website and everything. And then the Washington State, the WSPTA platform also will be going out through their channels. And that's even if you're not a school board member, doesn't matter. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's public facing on the website. Thanks for the question.
Hey, looks like it's my turn. I'm just going to spend just a few minutes talking about, I'm the Washington State PTA Region 6 Director, by the way, which means I support PTAs in Seattle, North Shore, and Shoreline. So it's a lot of PTAs, but we're all working together, promoting the health and welfare of our students and families across the state. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about Washington State PTA's advocacy platform, and I just have a few slides to share, so I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to start, and it's not letting me. Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me do this in large format. That's weird.
You would normally do slideshow or view?
Yeah, it's not letting me. Oh wait, here it goes. There it goes. Here we go. Here we go. Ta-da. Okay. So I can't see anyone. So if you're raising a hand or something, I can't see you, but June can see you. So this is how Washington State PTA's legislative platform is laid out. It's sort of like a pyramid. At the foundation are our legislative principles, which are pretty broad in scope. They're pretty short, and they represent the values on which our advocacy is based. The next layer of the pyramid is our resolutions, which are much longer, and they're basically written as position papers. So they're positions that we take on a variety of topics that are important for the health and welfare of youth and families. And these include any national PTA position statements by default. So by default, national PTA positions are Washington State PTA positions, and by default, Washington State PTA positions are also local PTA positions. So you can't, as a local PTA, create a position that goes against something that's in our principles resolutions. And then at the top of the pyramid are issues, whereas resolutions and principles are a permanent part of our platform unless repealed by our members. Issues are short-term. They align with the 2-year cycle of the legislature. So in the last legislative assembly, which is where our members come to vote in any changes to our legislative platform or to make additions to it, we voted in a new crop of issues, and those will expire in 2 years. And the reason for that is that issues tend to be kind of more specifically aligned with things that we think are going to come up in this legislative session or things that we think are critically important right this moment to address. And I should have said not at our last legislative assembly, at our previous legislative assembly before that is when we passed the issues. At the last legislative assembly, we did a little update and added an extra issue. So when we gather at legislative assembly to vote on our platform and specifically our issues, we have a whole list of issues usually, and we ask our membership to vote for their top 5. So the top 5 issues are the ones that that we pay the most attention to on the Washington State PTA Advocacy Committee, and that our legislative consultant, Marie Sullivan, pays the most attention to when she's screening bills. And so those top 5 are listed here. They're closing the funding gaps, addressing the student mental health crisis, addressing funding, inclusion, and supports in special education, preventing and reducing gun violence and suicide, and expanding school construction funding options. And our also supported issues are ones that didn't make the top 5, but they're still on our platform. So we still try to pay attention to things that happen there. They are increasing educational equity by closing the digital divide, mitigating the adverse impacts of climate change, and restoring funding for education and wraparound supports. The restoring funding for education and wraparound supports is one that we just added at this legislative session, basically as a result of some of the funding cancellations being done by the federal government right now. So that's my slideshow that I'm going to share, but I also wanted to just very quickly show 2 pages on the Washington State PTA website that I think will be very helpful to you as advocates. So I am going to make sure, yep. Give me 1 second here. So this is our main advocacy website. And you can see that it has the pyramid that I just showed you. And then it has our priorities for this 2-year cycle of the legislature. And they're listed out here as top 5. And if you click on these tabs, you can see the entire issue. This is the whole issue. And then if you click on these kinds of links, they'll take you to a 1-pager for every single issue, so you can get more informed and educated, and so you can share that information with legislators. And then the other page that's really, really useful is this one called Resources. And on this page, you'll find how to support ballot measures, how to have candidate forums, and also, I think more relevant to our discussion today, some resources here, like acronyms in education, our end of legislative session reports, so you can find our scorecard from last legislative session, what we accomplished and what we still have left to do, as well as a citizen's guide to Washington State, which includes, this comes from the state guide to Washington State K-12 finance. So that's all I'm going to talk about right now. And I'm going to throw it to Danica, who's going to tell you a little bit about what's happening in Olympia right now.
And there's one question of regarding before we move on is how many of Washington State PTA's priorities are also priorities for the National PTA? Do you know, or do you want to come back to that?
I don't want to say priorities. So I'm not sure that National PTA actually ranks their position statements in any order, but Danica can chime in if I'm wrong about that. She's a little more connected to legislative federal advocacy. So a lot of them align, but I'm not sure that National has the same ordered list. So
thank you.
Yep.
And now we have Danica. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's meeting. Like I've been introduced, I'm Danica. I do some advocacy work at our state level and at a few local Seattle public schools. And what I'm really into is bringing folks, especially for their first time, to meet with their elected representatives. And even more than that, I love to get kids there because exercising those civic engagement tools are tools you need for your whole life, and maybe tools we haven't been developing enough lately. So that's where I come from. But what I was asked to talk a little bit about today is just kind of the state of play. And I think school board director Rankin mentioned some of this, but I'm gonna say it in the way I do. So, across Washington, schools are really feeling the effect of a growing budget crisis, and statewide revenues are declining, leaving less money available for education, just as costs for schools are continuing to rise. And at the same time, many one-time federal supports that helped schools through the pandemic, funding for learning, like special recovery targeted learning, student mental health, technology, food have expired, and that loss is creating some real gaps. And then the districts are being forced to look to make more cuts, not because of any kind of mismanagement, but because that funding that once filled those holes is just simply gone. And we're seeing impacts everywhere, from delayed maintenance, larger class sizes, to reduce support staff and shorten programs. So our state was planning, needs about $77 billion to run, and that's with education getting an ever smaller piece of the pie. It used to be about 50% of the budget, and I always like to say, and 100% of our future, but it's at about 43%, so it's shrinking. But anyway, for the whole state, about 77 billion is what they need, and they're only going to have 74 billion. So it's really like a $3 to $4 billion shortfall. And then on top of that, the expected revenue, what they thought they were getting from all the taxes, is $500 million short. And then I don't know if you've been following, but there's been some big changes on the federal level. So money from IDEA that funded special education, or from food, and from various programs that went to education are just gone. So there's just compounding issues. And like I said at the beginning, costs are going up. So insurance rates are up 60%, but schools have to pay that every time. Fuel costs, milk is up 30% from just a few years ago. So the budget was already looking bad. But last year, the legislature made a pretty big investment into education in terms of special education. It wasn't everything we needed. It didn't close the gap, but it was significant. Now, probably for everyone on this call, you know that education is the paramount duty. It's one of the things that everybody in the legislature swears to uphold. But this year, if we go, and especially for Region 6, because some of the strongest advocates for education in the whole state are from our region, if we go in super fired up about that paramount duty and about these gaps, I'm not sure how well received that's going to be, because there is no money. And whether it's their paramount duty or not, and I think it should be, and I think it's so awesome of our state to have that in our Constitution, this year, it is going to be a matter of life and death how they allocate this funding. People are going to die from food insecurity, I think, and healthcare. So I don't think it's a year to go in asking for big investments in education. And you heard a little bit about this before. So the approach is to ask for no cuts to education. No, don't come after our revenue, or not our revenue, but the allocations that are going to education. We're not covering an ample education yet, but what we don't want is to lose any. And one of the reasons why we could lose some is the way budgets go for education is on a per student basis, and there's declining enrollment. And it's not because people are just fleeing the schools. It's mostly because of declining birth rates. But when there are declining enrollment, there's just money that may have been earmarked that looks like it's free money. And what we're going to be doing when we go to the legislature is asking them to keep that money in education, to plug these serious holes, and to make sure that money that is already earmarked for education stays there. And actually, that's going to be a hard fight. So the person in charge of making budgets in the Senate, the governor's budget will come out in December, and that'll be kind of a guidepost. But for the Senate Ways and Means, that's June Robinson. She just put out a press release that says, to her members of the Senate, don't ask me for any money. Don't let your constituents ask me for any money. We are entertaining zero requests for money. In the House, you've got Tim Ormsby, who does the same thing. And he's like, yeah, there's no money. It's not happening. So again, this is not a year where we would be able to get any money if we went in and asked for it. And it's a year that we don't want to damage the relationships we have, because we did get a kind of a significant investment. But it is a year that we have a really tall order just to keep the money that we have. So that's just an overview of what the state of the state is, which is budget crisis. I think in Senator June Robinson's words, it's all bad news. So while that's bad, what's not bad is the experience of going to Olympia or talking to your representatives. I would love to talk more about this, so ask me if you have any questions, but they work for you. They are doing their job when they meet with you and hear what's important, and it is really important. So I'm taking a group of parents from Region 6 on December 5th, and just don't miss. If you can mark your calendars now, you've got to come to the PTA's Advocacy Day on Martin Luther King Day. There's no school, there's no traffic. We all go down to Olympia with the kids, and it is just the best time. And you start investing in these relationships with these legislators. Pretty soon they're taking your call. It's easier to get a meeting. You can see them in the district. And even better, they come to you when they have a question about education. So that's some of the stuff. And School Board Director Rankin, if you want me to come to your local PTA and talk about going to Olympia or expand on this, I have a whole program. I have a little 3-part series. Happy to do it. And I hope to see you guys all in Olympia.
Thank you so much. I would want to field some questions if anyone has some questions in the group.
Danica, can you put your state PTA email in the chat? So if people want to join you on December 5th, they can contact you.
I sure will. And the other thing I'm going to put in the chat before, because I already have it preloaded, is how you find out who your legislators are. So here's your find your district link, and you just put your address in there, and it'll tell you who your representatives are. And now I'll put in my address too. So sure.
Should we do that as an exercise right now, just to fill in some time, just in case if people are thinking about any questions? Oh, I think we have a question. Yes, Anne Marie.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't.
Okay.
I can't turn on. Anne Marie, I'm with Lincoln High School. The December 5th that you were going fairly fast to try and keep to the time. What's the December 5th before the legislature gathers? That is just I wasn't quite sure.
A little something we started last year, and the reason why, especially in a short session, so last year it was 105 days. That's how many days the legislature met. They ended at the end of April. This year it's 60 days. That makes like zero chance for anything to pass practically, except for stuff that's got a lot of momentum. Well, before the session starts, the entire legislature comes to Olympia, so everybody's there. Otherwise, they're not there like in the summer. Like you might have a one-off. So on December 5th, the entire House and the entire Senate are there. But because it's not the session yet, it's much easier to get appointments. So we found that we can get appointments with our legislators, and we can have a lot of time with them. So I think we already have like 9 meetings scheduled with Region 6 legislators. So it's just a great time to go. They're not as stressed. You can meet them, and you can put in front of them our most important asks, so that as they go into this whirlwind of 60 days, they have an idea of what their constituents think is really important.
So I'm going to go through the practicum of going through the district finder. So I put in John Stanford's address for my own privacy. And so here in that link that Danica put inside, you can put your address in there and find my district. And here are our legislators right there. And so that you can email them, say what's up, and then you get to find out what committees they're in, if those are things that are really, really important. And I also wanted to say, I wanted to find out for the legislative session too, what we did at legislative session, we talked about, even if your representative is not in the education committee, what are other committees that are really, really important that we can also, if your legislator happens to be in that committee? Like
appropriations and ways and means. So those are the respective appropriations is at the state level and the federal level is how money gets allocated. And so any bills that make it through various committees, their last stop before they go on to onto the full legislature to adopt or not is appropriations in the House and Ways and Means in the Senate. And that is where sometimes policies go to die. There's various cutoffs in each session. There's various cutoffs where if a bill hasn't advanced a certain amount, it's considered dead. There's as Danica was saying, 60 days is not a lot of time. What will mostly come forward are things that they're not totally dead because we do stuff by biennium. So there's some bills that are on life support from last session that will be revived this session, and legislators will try to get through various committees. Any bill that doesn't get passed by the end of this session, because it's the second session of the biennium, is dead. And for it to come back, it would have to come back as a new bill in the next biennium, which would be in January 2027. But the appropriations and Ways and Means are, even if things get passed and people are feeling really hopeful about it, if the budget writers don't put money onto them, they can just go away. Or they can get passed as in, we think this is a great idea, but again, if there's no money attached to it, it's unlikely to be anything more than a policy statement.
And I wanted to point out, if anyone has Joe Fitzgibbons, he's in Rules and Appropriations.
Yes, and he's funny. I wish he cared more about not that he doesn't care about education, but it's like not his thing.
Yeah.
But if anybody lives in his area, he may listen to you more than to some of the rest of us.
And then Danica put in the chat, Danica, do you want to talk about what other committees that are important to you as SPS advocates?
So one of the main things that we don't fund for education is transportation. Like I said, I have kids in 3 different Seattle public schools. Not one of them get a bus. All I do is drive all day. So transportation is an important one. I also put the rules committee, the last hurdle before a bill makes it after it's got its fiscal note. It has to go through the rules committee. That's an important place before it goes to the floor for that final vote. And then I put public safety because historically and even now, gun safety in schools is so important. And that's a lot of where those bills are heard. And then Natalya didn't mention this, and she's probably not going to be shocked that I'm going to mention this, but one of the resolutions we just passed had to do with digital and AI and internet safety at our PTA convention. And I don't even know where those bills might come up necessarily, but those are going to have an increasing effect on our students. And I think so if that's something you're interested in too, following those bills, I'm not even sure which committees they'll show up in.
And just to tag on to that, we also have a new resolution. Well, it's kind of an updated, but it's more of a brand new resolution than anything else on supporting our immigrant students and families. And, we're looking to have legislation around having safe zones. This is also coming up at the federal level. It's a big priority for national PTAs to bring back some safe zones where federal immigration enforcement doesn't happen. And so, that's and sort of generally making sure that our state is a welcoming place for immigrants and families. And so any legislation around that is also, I believe there's a committee that specifically deals with sort of immigration and maybe it's justice issues. I'm not sure. I have to think about that for a second.
Yeah, and they're all going to have slightly different names in the House and in the Senate. So you will sometimes think like, oh, appropriations, that's the budget. And then you look over in the other and you're like, I don't see a budget committee. I don't see it's Ways and Means or it's whatever. But something that I do is state PTA puts out a really great bill tracker. And so does Washington, WSPTA, the School Director Association has a bill tracker. You don't have to be members of either to access those. They'll be on their websites. And a lot of other organizations do the same thing. There are so many, last year, especially because everybody was sort of still rebounding a little bit from the pandemic. During the pandemic, when everybody was remote, legislators were asked to kind of hold things back. And last year and the year before were the first, like, everybody just let it all out. So there was like a record number of bills. And in the first, I have certain ways of my own doing where, like, I don't bother memorizing bill numbers until they get to a certain point, but I do have a spreadsheet. And I will also cross-reference that with what committee is that in? Oh my gosh, Jamie Peterson's in that committee. I'm going to send him an email, or I'm going to text him about this, which I know everybody doesn't have his phone number, but that's kind of strategies you can use as you look at, as Natalya is putting in the chat, look at the bill trackers, and the bill trackers will say what the bill number is, where it is. The website for the state legislature itself is also fantastic if you know what you're looking for. It can be hard to just like, oh, I'm just going to look up bills and where they are. That can be hard because it's all done by schedule. But if you know the bill number through, like, if you see a bill on somebody else's bill tracker and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a bill that's really important to me to follow, you can put it on a state legislature website and it will tell you everything about that bill, about the history, if it came, what it advanced last session, amendments that were made, in a way that I find extremely helpful.
I
And
just
you can
dropped
see,
into
like,
the chat the Washington State PTA's advocacy action alerts.
oh yeah,
And those will
that's
send
fantastic.
out alerts on
Yeah.
really key bills as it goes on during the legislature. So you don't have to try and master all that at once. So this is a good place to follow.
Absolutely. So yeah, you can dive deep and do the tracker, or you can wait for those advocacy alerts and be like, oh my gosh, that's one of the bills our PTA was really interested in. I'm going to let my whole PTA know. Let's all send an email, or we're going to send a joint letter, or whatever kind of thing. And
we're in the process of migrating to a new alert system, so you can't quite yet sign up, but very, very, very soon we will have it set up so that you can sign up for action alerts. I believe that if you've signed up for action alerts in the past, that will probably carry over to the new system, but I don't quote me on that. So just keep checking back on that site. It'll be up soon.
Something that I want to throw out there too, I don't know, something I've done in the past, and I can't remember because I was board president in 2024, and honestly, some things are starting to blur together, so I can't remember if I did it the time I was president, but definitely before that. I had offered to meet with, on a regular basis during session, with legislative chairs from our local PTAs. So I don't know what structure you guys are doing now, but if there's, a handful of legislative chairs and or board presidents from PTAs, and if Hala and Blaine and other people on the PTA board are interested in this, I would be happy to do I think we used to do it weekly, where I would just pop in and give an update to legislative chairs so that they could then take that back to their full PTA or put it in their newsletter or whatever kind of thing they do, and just talk a little bit more about, sorry, cat butt, talk a little bit more about, what's moving, what's not, just a little bit more, I guess, like insider scoop, because things happen really fast. And especially during a short session, you might think like, oh, I'm watching this bill, and then it could be like 2 or 3 days later and it's gone.
I have,
gone. Or it's been merged into another one, or you thought that it was moving forward here and it's actually moving forward there. It's a lot, but there are ways that all of us working together can make it easier for anybody who wants to advocate to do so in a way that works for them. And that's what not to like be a pitch for PTA, but that's what I love about PTA, is that, you have your legislative chairs who may be, years long experienced advocates, or they may have put their name down for an open seat on the PTA board and don't know what it really means, but really want to advocate. And then you may have members who are really passionate and want to be involved and don't have time to follow all this stuff, but they'll send an email, or they want to come to a meeting in Olympia, whatever that is. That's, to me, even when things feel really crappy and overwhelming, that's how I personally get really excited about just there's something for everybody to do to advocate for the kids that we all love and care about so much. And we literally can't get anything done if everybody doesn't take a little piece. So, however you all want to do that as we move into, I know your board's turn, there's always different people involved. So, but I would be happy to resume that practice if that's of interest but I'll put that to you guys to let me know if you want to do that.
That looks like there is some interest in that. And I just wanted to, for time check at 7:29, I just wanted to put this question in the room and then the answer that Danica, do the senators and representatives get new assignments before session? And then Danica, do you want to read your reply?
I said for the most part, they don't, especially chairs tend to hang on to those chairships, but new members do. And this year there will be some shakeups, and there really have been some new members. So for the most part, they don't.
Awesome.
One other thing I want to say actually connected to that is that and if you have imposter syndrome like me and like many women, frankly, and we shouldn't because we're really smart. But if you have imposter syndrome, we think, oh my gosh, that person's a legislator. They already have all the information. When it comes to education, you likely are going to find yourself in a position where you're providing your legislator with information about why a bill is important and how to advocate for it that they might not already have. So when you go when you're talking with legislators, when you're sending emails, you're advocating for the bills and things that you want, but you may also find yourself in a position of being able to say, how can I help you understand why this matters so much? Because they actually likely won't know. Not for any malicious intent or not because they're not capable, but just because they're state legislators and there's so many different issues that they're looking at and so many different things that brought them to that role. And unfortunately, they don't hear a lot about public education, even though it is 50% of the budget, or now it's 42, should be 50%. But a lot of times you will be in the position of saying, let me tell you why this is really important. Let me tell you a story about how it impacts kids at my child's school. And if you're watching, you'll see them advocate stronger because they're able to take a personal story that you gave them. Even if they don't know all the ins and outs of the thing, they'll be able to elevate your voice. So it does really matter. And I've seen it make a huge difference for people that maybe seemed indifferent to education when they get the opportunity to hear from someone in their district or someone at a school in their neighborhood that they're like, oh, it's not just, we have this much money and we want this much money. It's, oh, I didn't realize that it's a state limitation that's keeping you from being able to provide this to the kids at your school. I want to make sure that that can happen. I get really excited about legislative sessions.
No, data, not stories, they say, right? They have all the data, but the stories really help humanize our
really makes
experiences. And yeah, I see Natalya be like, yeah, I mean, it depends on what the story is, but maybe, and I just wanted to thank you guys all for just sharing in this space tonight. I will send out a follow-up email and maybe a poll for maybe if we wanted to figure out if we wanted to do a weekly, because I saw that there was some interest in that. And I'm just going to plug next Monday, we're going to have a hybrid meeting at John Stanford. So it's going to be Zoom and hybrid. And we are going to talk with some enrollment and budget questions.
Oh, awesome.
With Fred Podesta, our interim SPS superintendent, and then Kirk Buttleman. They were trying to give me the new superintendent. I was like, well, no, let's ground him in and welcome in our DEI meeting in January. So
yeah, also he doesn't have a contract with us yet. Don't make
him
work for free.
I know, and I was like, calm down, you guys. Fred, I know you want to get out of the chair, but So I just wanted to invite you guys to that space, and just to go back to our previous slide too. We also have legislative updates and in community, but I just remember one of our, someone said, they're like, the opposite of fascism is solidarity. And so we all have to work together to create and uplift our stories and to lock in arms with each other in order to support each other. So thank you guys. It's 7:33.
Can I just say something?
Oh, yeah. Sabrina, yes.
I want to give a shout out to our new superintendent, and he seems like family, so I'm gonna go ahead and call him Ben. But one of our student school board members asked him if he would be involved in the training that this Mary Furtakis, who's a part of State Board of Education, Sabi and her co-wrote some presentations together, a 3-part for our student board members and also our student leaders. And he came in via Zoom, dressed up, almost ready to go to his event. He gave great time. Director Rankin was there, had a great time, was, very involved with the students. It was a great experience. But she will tell you, this man is student-centered. He had great collaboration with our students and the way he embraced them. So I just really want to give a shout out at the end of this to Director Rankin and also for our board for bringing this man in a time that we really need a breath of fresh air and somebody who is unapologetically student-centered and knows how to engage with them and listen to them. And, from what I've seen on Saturday, he looks like a superintendent who's going to let who is most important, the students, lead him. So I just wanted to close out with that and just give gratitude to Washington State PTA support, but more importantly, to the time Director Rankin put in
Thanks,
with us
Sabrina.
on Saturday. And also just for our board for giving us hope again. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this meeting, and keep an eye out for more meetings, and please email us if you need support. Thank you.
Thanks,
And I'd
everyone.
like to thank our interpreters, Uba and Andrea, for our Spanish and Somali interpretation. So thank you so much. And there'll be Spanish, Somali, and ASL on Monday. So thank you so much. All right. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.